She called my office a glorified shed. It was a small, detached structure behind the house, insulated and wired for electricity, with a drafting table, rows of schematics, and the lingering scent of sawdust and coffee. It was where I ran my construction management business, a small but successful firm that specialized in high-end custom homes. To Sarah, it was an embarrassment, a constant, physical reminder of what she considered my small, provincial life. A life she had decided was no longer good enough for her. The final proof came on a Tuesday. I was standing in the kitchen, making a sandwich, when her car pulled into the driveway an hour earlier than usual. I heard the front door open and her voice, bright and brittle with an excitement she hadn't directed at me in years. She was on the phone, presumably with her mother, Eleanor. I remained silent, the knife hovering over the bread. "I got it, Mom. It's done," she squealed, her voice echoing from the foyer. $100 million. Apex Dynamics signed. The wire transfer is in escrow. Can you believe it? It's finally real. I felt a small, distant flicker of pride for her. She had worked relentlessly on her tech startup, InnovateSphere. I had been there for all of it. I had made the coffee on the 3-day coding binges. I had listened to her practice her pitches until 4 in the morning. I had sold the small commercial property my grandfather left me to provide her with the $75,000 in seed money she needed to get started. Telling her it was just a little something I had saved up, I had believed in her, even when her ambition began to curdle into something sharp and dismissive. "This changes everything," she continued, her footsteps clicking on the hardwood floor as she moved into the living room. "I'm free. I can finally shed the dead weight." Dead weight. The words landed like stones in the quiet kitchen. I stopped moving. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, filling the sudden, cold vacuum in my chest. There was no mistaking the meaning. I was the dead weight. "I'm filing the papers this week," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, gleeful whisper. "I've already spoken to the best divorce attorney in the city. He says with the Apex contract, I'm untouchable. David won't know what hit him. He can have his little shed and his tool belts. I'm moving on to the world I was built for." I slowly placed the knife on the counter. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The initial shock was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me winded, but my mind was already shifting. The pain was there, a deep, tectonic ache, but something else was rising to the surface. Clarity. For years, I had ignored the small slights, the condescending remarks about my job, the way she would introduce me at her networking events as someone who works with his hands, as if it were a charming but primitive hobby. I had chalked it up to stress, to the pressure of her ambitions. I had been a fool. She had mistaken my patience for weakness, my quiet support for a lack of ambition, my love for a leash, and now, flush with a victory I had helped finance, she was preparing to discard me like a piece of outdated hardware. I finished making my sandwich. I ate it standing at the counter, methodically, chewing each bite as a plan began to form. It was not a plan born of rage or a desire for petty revenge. It was a plan born of necessity, a cold, logical sequence of actions designed to protect what was mine and to reveal the truth. She wanted to play a high-stakes game. She had no idea I owned the casino. After I finished eating, I washed my plate, dried it and put it away. I walked out the back door and into my glorified shed. I closed the door, the familiar click of the lock sounding more final than ever before. I sat down not at my drafting table, but at the clean, modern desk in the corner, the one with the encrypted laptop and the direct, secure line. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Mark," a calm voice answered. "It's me," I said. "She's making her move. The Apex contract is signed. She's filing for divorce." There was a brief pause on the other end. Mark wasn't just my lawyer. He was my oldest friend and the public face of my real business. He was the CEO of Orion Capital Partners, the venture capital firm that had, 6 months ago, led the series of funding round for InnovateSphere. "Understood," Mark said, his voice devoid of surprise. He had warned me this might happen. Do you want to proceed with the primary or secondary protocol? I looked around my office, at the blueprints for a beautiful home I was building for a young family, at the photos of the sturdy, honest structures I had helped bring into the world. Then I thought of her words. Dead weight. Primary protocol, Mark, I said. Full execution. But we let her make all the first moves. I want her to feel completely in control, right up until the end. Consider it done, he replied. I'll begin the necessary preparations. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said. And the strange thing was, it was almost true. The hurt was a deep ocean, but my mind was a ship on the surface, sailing on a clear, determined course. I'm just a simple construction manager. Remember? I have a foundation to inspect in the morning. We disconnected. I sat in the silence for a moment, then turned to my laptop. With a few keystrokes, I logged into a series of accounts that painted a very different picture of my life than the one Sarah saw. Orion Capital was mine. The holding company that had recently acquired Apex Dynamics was also mine. The entire $100 million contract was a transaction between two entities I controlled, a strategic investment in a technology one believed in, run by a woman I had once loved. She thought this contract was her ticket to freedom. In reality, it was the key to her cage. She just didn't know that I was the one who had forged it, and I was the only one who could turn it in the lock. When Sarah came home that evening, she was glowing. It was a cruel, beautiful sight. She had that spark in her eye I hadn't seen since the very early days of our marriage, the one that made me fall in love with her drive and passion. Now, it was directed at a future that didn't include me. Big day, I said, keeping my voice level. I was reading a trade magazine on the couch, acting as if it were any other Tuesday. The biggest, she said, kicking off her expensive heels. She poured herself a glass of wine. We landed the Apex deal. It's going to change everything. I'm happy for you, Sarah, I said, and I meant it. I was happy for the version of her that had dreamed of this, the woman who had sketched out her business plan on napkins at our kitchen table. I was just sad that woman was gone. Thanks, David, she said, her tone slightly dismissive, as if my happiness was a quaint but irrelevant footnote to her grand story. She swirled the wine in her glass, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Things are going to be very different from now on. I'm sure they are, I replied, turning a page in my magazine. The papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier, a thick, intimidating manila envelope. Sarah was at a celebratory dinner with her new business partners. I signed for the package and took it to the kitchen table. I opened it and read through the petition for dissolution of marriage. Her lawyer was aggressive. They were claiming everything. The house, which had been in my family for 3 generations, a majority of our liquid assets, and most audaciously, 50% of my company's future earnings as alimony, citing her emotional labor and support that allowed me to run my modest business. The irony was a bitter pill. She was simultaneously discarding me for being small while demanding a share of a future she believed would be insignificant compared to her own. Her filing was built on the assumption that I was a simple man with a simple life, a man who could be easily intimidated and rolled over. It was the foundation of her entire strategy. And like any poorly built foundation, it was destined to crumble. I scanned the documents, noting the name of her attorney, a high-powered shark known for his ruthless tactics. Then I filed the papers neatly and placed them in my briefcase. I would drop them off with Mark in the morning. When Sarah finally came home after midnight, flushed with champagne and success, she saw the envelope on the table. "Oh," she said, her feigned surprise paper-thin. "You got them." "I did," I said. I was sitting in the darkened living room, the glow of a single lamp illuminating my face. She shifted her weight, suddenly uncomfortable. My lack of a dramatic reaction was clearly not part of her script. "David, I think this is for the best. We've grown apart. We want different things. You want a world I'm not a part of," I stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I want a world I've earned," she snapped, her composure cracking for a second. "I built Innovate Sphere from nothing. I'm on the verge of something incredible, and I need a partner who understands that. Someone who fits. Someone who wasn't dead weight. I heard the unspoken words hang in the air between us. I see, I said. Well, I'll have my lawyer look over the documents. Her relief was palpable. Of course, that's the way to do it. We can be civil about this. She saw my calmness as resignation, my quietness as defeat. This was exactly what I wanted. There's just one thing, Sarah, I said as she turned to go upstairs. The house. It was my grandmother's. It's not just a house to me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. David, let the lawyers handle it. It's an asset, that's all. And frankly, I have the resources to fight for it. You don't. There it was again. The gross underestimation. The belief that my resources were limited to the visible income of my construction firm. Okay, Sarah, I said softly. Let the lawyers handle it. Over the next few weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I went to work, I managed my crews, I reviewed blueprints, and I ensured my projects remained on schedule. I moved into the guest room to give Sarah her space. She began a whirlwind of activity. There were shopping sprees for a new wardrobe, consultations with interior decorators about opening up the living space, and late-night calls filled with laughter and excitement. She was often with Julian Vance, the charismatic CEO of Apex Dynamics. Their picture appeared on a society blog, captioned Tech's New Power Couple. She left the magazine open on the coffee table for me to find. I felt nothing but a profound sense of melancholy. She was building a fantasy life on a lie, completely oblivious to the fact that Julian Vance was merely a well-paid actor in a drama I was directing. Mark had briefed him. Julian's job was to embody everything Sarah craved: wealth, status, and glamour, and to keep her distracted while we moved our own pieces into place. My instructions to Mark were simple. We would not contest the divorce. We would, however, contest the division of assets. My response to her initial filing was deliberately mild. We acknowledged the petition and requested standard financial discovery. It was a move designed to lull her and her lawyer into a false sense of security. Her lawyer, a man named Sterling, was arrogant. He sent over a mountain of paperwork detailing InnovateSphere's valuation, the Apex contract, and projected earnings. It was a show of force, meant to intimidate. In return, Mark sent over my financials: the modest income from my construction company, my simple retirement account, the deed to the house showing it was transferred into both our names 5 years ago. On paper, I looked exactly like the man she believed me to be, outmatched and outgunned. His response is pathetic. I overheard her telling her mother on the phone one evening. He's basically admitting he has nothing. Sterling says we can wrap this up quickly. I'll give him a small settlement, enough to get a little apartment, and that'll be it. Generous, under the circumstances. The first mediation session was scheduled for a month after the initial filing. It was to be held at a neutral law firm downtown. I wore a simple suit, one I'd had for years. Sarah arrived in a brand new designer dress, looking every bit the tech mogul. She was flanked by Sterling, who oozed smug confidence. We sat across a polished mahogany table. Mark was beside me, his expression placid. Sterling started, laying out their position. It was a performance. He spoke of Sarah's genius, her tireless work, and how she had single-handedly built a $100 million company. He painted me as a supportive but ultimately ancillary figure who was now attempting to unfairly profit from her success. Therefore, he concluded, we are prepared to offer Mr. Miller a one-time settlement of $200,000, in exchange for which he will vacate the family home and relinquish all claims to any assets related to InnovateSphere, past, present, and future. Sarah looked at me with a magnanimous pity that made my stomach turn. She truly believed she was being generous. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Mark. Mark nodded slowly. He opened his briefcase and took out a single, slender file. He didn't say a word, simply slid one document across the table to Sterling. Sterling picked it up, a dismissive sneer on his face. As he read, the sneer slowly dissolved. His eyes widened slightly, He read it again, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice losing some of its bluster. "That," Mark said calmly, "is the original seed funding agreement for Innovate Sphere, then operating as a sole proprietorship under Sarah Miller's name. It's for $75,000. It was the capital that allowed her to incorporate, build her prototype, and attract her first angel investors." Sarah leaned over to look at the paper. "That was a personal loan from David," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "A gift, really. It's irrelevant." "On the contrary," Mark continued, his voice as smooth as polished stone, "it is highly relevant. If you'll direct your attention to paragraph 4, subsection B, you'll note the collateral clause. The loan was secured against the full, unencumbered value of the property at 12 Elm Street." He paused for effect. "This house." Sterling's face went pale. "The house is a marital asset. The house was in Mr. Miller's family for over 60 years before the marriage," Mark countered. "He added Miss Miller to the deed as a gesture of love and commitment. However, at the time of this loan, she willingly signed an agreement pledging the full value of the property as security. Furthermore, if you read subsection C, you'll find the acceleration clause." He let the words hang in the air. Sarah snatched the paper from her lawyer, her eyes scanning the page frantically. "The clause states," Mark continued, "that in the event of a marital dissolution initiated by the borrower, the full principal, plus a compounded interest rate of 12% per annum, becomes immediately due and payable to the lender. The lender, in this case, is not David Miller personally, but the Miller Family Trust." Sarah looked up, her face a mask of confusion and fury. "What trust? You told me you sold a property." "I simplified things for you," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet but carried across the silent room. "You were stressed. I didn't want to complicate your life with financial details. The total amount due with interest is $142,874, Mark said, consulting a notepad. "If it is not paid within 30 days, the trust is legally entitled to place a lien on the house and force a sale to recoup the funds. Since you are demanding the house in the divorce, this debt would become your sole responsibility." The trap had sprung. It was a small one, a warning shot, but it hit its mark. Her entire strategy was predicated on me being poor and unsophisticated. This document, which she had signed without a second thought years ago, proved that at least one of those assumptions was wrong. "This is ridiculous," Sarah sputtered, looking at her lawyer for support. "He can't do this." Sterling, however, was a professional. He knew a legally binding document when he saw one. He was silent, his mind clearly racing as he reassessed the man sitting across the table from him. "We will, of course, need to review this," Sterling said stiffly. "By all means, take your time," Mark said pleasantly. "We have plenty more to discuss when you're ready. For example, the matter of the series of funding from Orion Capital and the rather unique clauses in their investment agreement." He closed his briefcase. The first crack in Sarah's perfect world had appeared. The fallout from that meeting was immediate. Sarah came home in a silent rage. The triumphant glow was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering fury. She didn't speak to me, but I could hear her on the phone with Sterling late into the night, her voice a sharp, angry buzz through the walls. Her strategy shifted. The magnanimity vanished, replaced by open hostility. She began to try and build a case against me, to paint me as a manipulative, controlling husband who had tricked her into signing that document. She told her friends, her mother, anyone who would listen, that I was trying to sabotage her success out of jealousy. Meanwhile, the second part of my plan went into effect. Mark, in his capacity as CEO of Orion Capital, sent an official notice to the Innovate Sphere board. It was a simple request for a preliminary audit and progress review on the Apex Dynamics integration. It was standard procedure for a major new contract, but the timing was deliberate. Simultaneously, Apex Dynamics, under my instruction, began to slow-walk its initial payments. A junior executive would call Sarah's CFO with tedious questions about milestone deliverables and compliance metrics. Small, bureaucratic hurdles began appearing out of nowhere, tying up the cash flow she was counting on to fund her legal battle and her lavish new lifestyle. The pressure began to mount. Julian Vance, who had been a constant, flattering presence at her side, started to become scarce. He was too busy for dinner, had an unexpected business trip, stopped answering her texts as quickly. He was a creature of success, and he could smell trouble. The moment her story changed from unstoppable tech visionary to woman embroiled in a messy divorce with potential financial complications, his interest evaporated. I watched all of this from a distance, a silent observer in my own home. I continued my routine. I got up early, went to my job sites, came home, and worked in my office. My consistency seemed to enrage her more than any overt act of aggression could. My calmness was a mirror she did not want to look into. About 2 weeks after the mediation, the breaking point came. She had just gotten off the phone with her CFO, and I could tell the news wasn't good. She stormed into the living room where I was reading the newspaper. "The Apex payments are stalled," she said, her voice tight with panic. "And Orion is breathing down our necks with this audit. Is this you? Are you doing this?" I looked up from my paper. "Sarah, I manage a construction company. I build houses. What makes you think I have any influence over a venture capital firm or a multinational tech corporation?" My denial was so simple, so plausible, that it only fueled her paranoia. She couldn't reconcile the man she thought she knew with the problems suddenly appearing in her professional life. She was looking for a conspiracy, but she was looking in the wrong direction. "I don't know," she shouted, her voice verging on hysterical. "But this all started when you brought out that stupid paper. You're trying to ruin me." "I'm not the one who filed for divorce, Sarah," I said quietly. "I'm not the one who called their partner dead weight. You set this in motion. You." She stared at me, her chest heaving. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear entered her eyes. The fear of the unknown. Her world, which had seemed so solid and certain a month ago, was beginning to feel like quicksand. That night, Julian officially ended things with her via a short, cold text message. The next morning, her platinum credit card was declined at her favorite coffee shop. The liquidity crisis was beginning. She found me in the kitchen, making coffee, the morning sun streaming through the window. She looked exhausted. The designer dress was rumpled. Her makeup was smeared, and the fight had gone out of her. "David," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I made a mistake. I didn't answer. I just continued to pour the coffee. "I was overwhelmed," she went on, tears welling in her eyes. "The contract, the money, it all went to my head. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean what I said. It was a masterful performance of contrition. But it was just that, a performance. She wasn't sorry for betraying me. She was sorry she was getting caught. She wasn't sorry for her greed. She was terrified of the consequences." "We can stop this," she pleaded, taking a step closer. "We can call off the lawyers. We can go back to how things were. Please, David. I need you." I turned to face her, holding my coffee mug. I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, and I felt a profound and final wave of sadness wash over me. The love was gone, eroded by years of quiet contempt and a final, unforgivable act of betrayal. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You don't need me. You need my resources. And you seem to have fundamentally misunderstood what those are." I took a sip of my coffee. "You should check your email," I said. "I believe there's an invitation for you. An emergency board meeting for InnovateSphere is scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning. You wouldn't want to be late." I walked past her and out the back door to my office, leaving her standing alone in the sunlit kitchen, a look of pure dread dawning on her face. The InnovateSphere boardroom was on the top floor of a sleek glass tower downtown. I had been there once before, a few years ago, when it was just an empty floor with concrete pillars and panoramic views. I had helped Sarah review the construction bids for the build-out. Now, it was the epitome of tech chic. Polished concrete floors, minimalist furniture, and a massive oak table at its center. I arrived 10 minutes early, taking a service elevator to an adjacent office where Mark was waiting. He was dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, a portfolio of documents resting on the desk in front of him. "Everything is in place," he said, handing me a slim folder. "The board members are all present. They've been briefed on the agenda. Sterling is here with her. She looks like she hasn't slept in a week." "Good," I said, my voice steady. There was no triumph in me, only a grim sense of finality. This was not a celebration. It was a demolition, a controlled, necessary demolition of a structure built on a rotten foundation. "Are you ready?" Mark asked, his gaze searching mine. I nodded once. "Let's finish it." We walked into the boardroom together. Sarah was already there, sitting at the table next to a visibly flustered Sterling. She looked up as we entered, her eyes locking onto Mark. She saw him as the source of her problems, the high-powered lawyer her simple husband had somehow managed to hire. She barely glanced at me, dismissing me as a mere spectator to her corporate drama. The other board members, 3 men and 2 women who represented various investor groups, all nodded at Mark with deference. They all knew who he was. None of them knew who I was. Mark took the seat at the head of the table. I took a chair against the wall, behind the main table, as if I were an assistant or a junior associate. It was a deliberate choice. I wanted her to forget I was even in the room. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Mark began, his voice commanding the room's attention. "We are here today because Orion Capital, as the primary investor in InnovateSphere, has uncovered serious issues that require the board's immediate attention. Our preliminary audit has revealed significant financial irregularities and what we believe to be multiple breaches of the executive employment agreement signed by the CEO, Miss Sarah Miller." Sterling immediately jumped to his feet. "My client strongly objects to these baseless accusations. This is nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt by her husband to gain leverage in their divorce proceedings." Mark didn't even look at him. He looked directly at Sarah. "The divorce is a separate matter, though it is certainly relevant to the issue of ethics. Let's start with the financials. We have documented over $200,000 in company funds being used for personal expenses in the last 6 weeks alone. A new car, designer clothing, high-end interior decorating services for a private residence, all categorized as client development or marketing expenses." He slid a sheaf of papers down the table. "These are the receipts and credit card statements." Sarah's face flushed. "Those were business expenses. I have to maintain a certain image for the company. An image you were cultivating to impress Julian Vance of Apex Dynamics, perhaps?" Mark countered smoothly. "Which brings us to the contract itself. The board was led to believe this was a standard technology licensing agreement. However, certain performance milestones and integration timelines are already being missed, jeopardizing the entire deal and exposing InnovateSphere to significant liability." "That's not true," Sarah insisted, her voice rising. "Apex is the one creating the delays." "Is it?" Mark asked mildly. He tapped his pen on the folder in front of him. "But the most serious issue is a breach of the morality clause and the key person provision in Miss Miller's contract. These clauses are standard in all of Orion Capital's investment agreements. They stipulate that the CEO must act in a way that is not detrimental to the company's reputation and must not engage in fraudulent or unethical behavior, either personal or professional." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "In her divorce filing, Miss Miller attempted to lay claim to assets tied to the company's initial seed funding, assets she had willingly signed over as collateral. She attempted to defraud the company's very first financial backer, the Miller Family Trust. This single act constitutes a profound ethical breach." Sarah was on her feet now, her eyes blazing with fury. "You can't do this. This is my company. I built it." "You built it with other people's money, Miss Miller," Mark said, his voice turning to ice. "And the people who provide the money set the rules. However, as CEO of Orion Capital, the final decision is not mine to make. It rests, as always, with the firm's beneficial owner." He gestured toward the back of the room. He has decided to join us today to render his decision personally. Every head in the room turned. They turned to me. I stood up from my chair against the wall. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table opposite Mark. I unbuttoned my suit jacket and sat down. The room was utterly silent. Sarah stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her brain was refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The man she called dead weight. The simple construction manager. The man she was so sure she had left behind in her small, dusty world. "You?" she finally whispered, the word a fragile puff of air. "It's you? Orion Capital. It's you." I met her gaze. The hurt, the anger, the years of quiet resentment. I let it all go. All that was left was a cold, hard, and inescapable truth. "Yes, Sarah," I said, my voice even. "Orion Capital is my family's private investment office. I've been running it for 15 years. Mark is my employee. I was your first investor through the trust, and I was your biggest investor through the fund." Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. Her entire reality was collapsing in on itself. "And Apex Dynamics?" she stammered. "A recent acquisition of a holding company I also control," I said matter-of-factly. "I thought the technology had potential. I still do. The company, however, needs a change in leadership." I looked at the board members, who were now staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. "As the majority shareholder and the ultimate authority behind your largest client, I am invoking the morality clause. I have lost all faith in Miss Miller's leadership and ethical judgment. I am calling for a vote of no confidence and her immediate termination for cause." Mark slid a final document into the center of the table. Under the terms of her employment contract, termination for cause results in the immediate forfeiture of all stock, options, and severance. She will leave with nothing but the personal items at her desk. Sarah made a choking sound. "No," she pleaded, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally, finding none. She looked back at me, her face crumbling. "David, please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I was wrong." "You're not sorry you did it, Sarah," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You're just sorry you got caught. You built this company on my money, and you were going to use it to destroy me. You called me dead weight. Well, this dead weight just sank your ship." I stood up. "Mark has my vote. The rest of you may vote as you see fit." I turned and walked toward the door without looking back. I could hear the board members murmuring their ayes. I could hear the beginning of a hysterical sob. I didn't stop. I walked out of the boardroom, out of the building, and into the bright, clear afternoon. It was over. The next day, I was at one of my sites, a hillside home overlooking the city. The framing was up, and the skeleton of the house stood stark against the blue sky. My crew was working, the sounds of hammers and saws filling the air. It was the sound of creation, of something real and tangible being built. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "She's out." Security escorted her from the building. "Sterling is making noise, but he has no legal ground to stand on. The house is yours, free and clear. Congratulations." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized was missing for a very long time. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into the box Sarah had built for me, hiding my capabilities so as not to intimidate her or overshadow her. That was over. I looked out at the view at the city sprawling below. She had wanted to conquer that world, to see it from the top of a glass tower. I was content right here on the solid earth, building things that would shelter families, things that would last. She had built her empire on a foundation of deceit and ego. I build things with honest materials, with steel and wood and concrete, on a foundation of integrity. And in the end, you can't fake a strong foundation. It either holds firm, or everything you've built on top of it comes crashing down. I took a deep breath of the dusty air, turned back to the foreman, and got back to work.